Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really digging into something quite complex. The state of play between India and the United States, especially now, with Donald Trump back in the White House since January 2025.
Yeah, it's a relationship that's always had layers, but this adds a whole new dynamic.
Exactly. And we know you want to get right to the heart of it, understand the real dynamics, the potential friction, maybe the opportunities too, without wading through endless commentary. So think of this as us doing the digging for you.
We've looked at, the geopolitical analysis, expert commentary, trying to pull out the most crucial threads.
Our mission really is to give you a clear sense of how India is navigating this renewed Trump era. Where are the potential bumps in the road, and where might things actually open up?
Well, one phrase that keeps cropping up is this idea of the Trump virus. Not literally, of course, but as a metaphor.
A metaphor for what exactly?
For that kind of unpredictable, disruptive energy he brings to international relations. And for India, that has some very specific implications.
Right, because on paper, the foundations look pretty solid. You always hear about the shared democratic values, although, what that means in practice can be debated.
Sure. And the economic ties are massive. Was it $120 billion in bilateral trade in 2024?
Well, that's the number. And significantly, a $30 billion surplus for India. That's not insignificant.
Not at all. Plus, the big one, shared concerns about China. That strategic alignment seems pretty fundamental.
It does. But that virus element, as you put it, it introduces this real instability, doesn't it? This potential for sudden shifts, for maybe impulsive decisions.
Absolutely. And you can understand why that creates a certain level of, anxiety within the Indian government, the diplomatic corps. They've dealt with them before, obviously.
So there's a playbook, maybe.
A playbook for unpredictability, perhaps. It's knowing you need to be prepared for anything, which keeps everyone sort of on edge.
And that feeling seems especially relevant when you look at trade. The possibility of renewed friction there, it feels quite real.
Oh, definitely. Trump's history with tariffs speaks for itself. And remember back in February 2025, just a month into the term.
Yeah, there were already pretty strong hints about new tariffs on Indian goods.
Strong hints. And that's not just abstract economics. It hits key sectors, hard pharmaceuticals, IT services, textiles.
And you immediately think about the real-world consequences, like textile workers in Surat, right? Their livelihoods are directly tied to these global flows.
Precisely. A policy decision made thousands of miles away can suddenly upend their reality. That's the human angle to these trade disputes.
And it wasn't just background noise. Stephen Miran, an advisor known to be close to Trump, explicitly called tariffs weapons of leverage around April 2025.
Weapons of leverage. That framing tells you a lot. It's less about mutual benefit, more about applying pressure.
Which India must have clocked. They've pushed back before. Remember the tariffs on American apples, almonds back in 2019?
I do. They showed they're willing to retaliate. So you could potentially see that cycle again. Maybe this time as Harley-Davidson's or bourbon-facing Indian tariffs.
It sets up a really delicate situation, a high-stakes negotiation, essentially, to try and avoid a trade spat that, frankly, wouldn't really benefit either side in the long run.
No, nobody really wins in a full-blown trade war.
Then, staying sort of on the economic front, there was that whole interesting development around Apple manufacturing.
Ah, yes, the May 2025 reports. Trump apparently pushing Apple to shift production back to the U.S.
Which runs directly counter to India's big Make in India push, trying to become a manufacturing powerhouse. A real potential clash there.
A direct collision course, you could say.
Yeah.
Trump's America First meets India's global manufacturing ambitions. But what was striking was India's reaction.
What do they signal?
Well, reports citing government sources, like through PTI, strongly indicated that Apple's investment plans in India were, quote, intact. Firm language.
Interesting. That suggests a certain confidence from India, doesn't it? Maybe a sense that they hold strong cards now, huge market, skilled labor, the whole tech ecosystem.
It does seem to signal that shift. India isn't just a passive recipient anymore. It's a major player that global companies like Apple need to engage with seriously.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit to geopolitics. That moment in May 2025 when Trump claimed he'd brokered an India-Pakistan ceasefire, that raised some eyebrows.
Understatement of the year, perhaps. India's response was remarkably fast and unambiguous.
External Affairs Minister Jaishankar, right? He was very clear.
Extremely clear. Emphasized the relationship with Pakistan is strictly bilateral. That phrase, strictly bilateral, is diplomatic code for stay out of it.
It really underlines a core principle for India's sovereignty and a real sensitivity about external mediation, especially from the U.S., on Pakistan-related issues.
Definitely. You have to remember the history there, Kashmir, the line of control.
Yeah.
It's deeply sensitive. And while, yes, a ceasefire was holding in early 2025, that was down to direct talks between India and Pakistan themselves.
So Trump's comment, intended perhaps to show him as a deal maker.
Instead, touched a very raw nerve in New Delhi. It highlights that constant tightrope walk for India,
How so?
balancing the need for a strong U.S. relationship with this absolute insistence on strategic autonomy, particularly in their own neighborhood.
Which brings us to the personal dynamic between Modi and Trump. It's always seemed, well, complicated.
Fickle is a word often used. You had those big public displays like Howdy Modi in Houston back in 2019. Huge.
Spectacle.
Huge. But behind the scenes, Trump himself has called Modi both a friend and a tough negotiator.
That probably captures the reality. It's pragmatic. There are concrete reasons for the partnership. Think U.S. defense sales to India, drones, helicopters, big deals.
Billions of dollars. And the China angle, of course. Technology
Wow.
transfers, too.
Exactly. For the U.S., India is this vital democratic counterweight to China in the Indo-Pacific, a massive market. It's strategic.
But with Trump, the reliability, the predictability of that strategic alignment, it's always a question mark, isn't it?
Always. Which leads directly into the China factor itself. Trump's more confrontational stance towards Beijing in 2025, that creates a really complex situation for India. Because India shares that incredibly long border with China.
Thousands of kilometers, yeah. And it's often tense. The memory of clashes like Galwan in 2020 is very fresh.
So India's playing a careful game.
A very careful game. You see them deepening ties with the Quad, the U.S., Japan, Australia. That sends a signal.
But they also maintain their relationship with Russia, a major defense supplier.
Right. It's strategic hedging. The big risk for India, though, is Trump suddenly changing tack on China, maybe cutting some kind of transactional deal that leaves India exposed.
That unpredictability again.
This is the defining feature.
Now, another arena where things get complicated is the digital world, specifically social media, X, or Twitter as we knew it.
Still a huge platform for shaping opinion, and one Trump uses constantly, very effectively from his perspective.
And in May 2025, India blocked thousands of X accounts, sparking a huge debate domestically about free speech versus national security.
Yeah, that's an ongoing tension.
Yeah.
But what's kind of interesting is seeing a potential parallel
Between
between the Indian government's efforts to, let's say, manage the information flow online and Trump's own very vocal attacks on fake news.
both seeking a degree of narrative control.
You could argue that, yeah.
Yeah.
Using different tools, obviously, but aiming for a similar outcome. For India, it's tricky balancing those domestic debates while also dealing with potential foreign influence via these same platforms.
Then there's climate change. A huge contrast in perspectives here.
A stark contrast. Trump's known skepticism versus India's increasing vulnerability. Those reports in February 2025 about potentially hitting the plus 2 degrees Celsius warming threshold by 2026, that's alarming.
Especially for India. Think heat waves, monsoon disruption, agriculture. The impacts are massive and direct.
Absolutely devastating potential. And while India is pushing hard on renewables, especially solar,
They need global cooperation, right? Climate accords, international agreements.
critically.
Yeah.
And if the U.S. under Trump pulls back from those commitments, it really undermines the whole global effort. That's a serious concern.
Finally, maybe just briefly, the shadow of COVID-19 still lingers, doesn't it?
In some ways, yes. There were those reports around May 2025 questioning if COVID deaths in India had been undercounted. It's a sensitive topic.
And it connects to that broader theme of trust, doesn't it? Trust in government, trust in data.
Exactly. Trump's initial downplaying of the virus, any suggestion of data manipulation anywhere, it erodes that public trust, which is so crucial, especially when facing global crises. You need reliable information.
So pulling all these threads together, what does India's strategy look like going forward in this environment?
Well, it seems to be shaping up as assertive but pragmatic on trade, holding firm on that no mediation regarding Pakistan while still deepening defense and tech ties with the U.S.,
Makes sense. What else?
prioritizing their own climate goals, regardless of the U.S. stance, and very carefully managing narratives both at home and internationally, particularly on social media.
It sounds like a strategy built on navigating complexity, almost by necessity.
I think that's right. It's an acceptance that this relationship, while hugely important, is going to be subject to potential turbulence and requires constant careful management. It's not on autopilot.
No, definitely not. So the U.S.-India partnership remains significant, crucial even, but it's operating under this cloud of unpredictability.
Precisely. Shared interests are strong, but so are the potential points of friction, amplified by the unique nature of the Trump presidency.
Which really leaves a big question hanging in the air for you, the listener, to think about.
Hmm.
Considering all these moving parts, what are the real long-term consequences? Not just for India and the U.S., but for global stability, for India's place in the world order.
Hmm.
That goes way beyond the day-to-day headlines, something to really mull over.